absolutely so far. And I know today will also be terrific. So we have Pat Watson with us today. Some of you may have come across Pat's book on the College Chapel, and you can get this book or buy it in the Conference and Accommodation Centre. They may also have it in the bookshop down the town. So I'm going to hand over to Pat now, and at the end there will be the opportunity for questions, etc. So Pat, over to you. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and you're very welcome to the talk today. I have lived in Maynooth over 40 years, and I have did my teaching diploma in Maynooth. I've been in and out of the college many times, but didn't really know an awful lot about it. And you take for granted something like the college when you live in a place like Maynooth. So it was really only when I retired, I decided that I would look into the college history in a little bit more detail. And in particular, I wanted to know why it was in Maynooth, in that it's unusual to have such a big a building and such an important college in Maynooth. Secondly, why there's such differing architecture in the place, from the Georgian to the Gothic. And also, thirdly, what sort of people were here that influenced the place, that are still influencing the place, and perhaps have a lasting influence on the college. So those were the three things that I was interested in. And having done a bit of research, I thought I might like to share this with you today. So I have a number of pictures in that I can't walk around with you. And if I start the video, then I can make my way through on a sort of a virtual tour. So I'm just trying to bring up the video here. I hope you can all see the screen. The first picture that was there was a picture of the college itself. The 18th century was a period of the penal laws, and as a result of the penal laws, Catholics were not allowed to have an education. They were deprived of many privileges, but education was a big one. And as a result, anybody who wanted to be educated, particularly for the priesthood, had to go to the continent of Europe, and many of them went to Paris. So there was a number of Irish colleges that had developed on the continent. But towards the end of the century, there were changes, and the catalyst for a lot of these changes was the French Revolution. And during that revolution, the Catholic Church was seen as a powerful establishment, and it was attacked, closed. A lot of priests were guillotined. So many of the Irish students had to return to Ireland, had to flee from France. And it was the worry of them arriving home back to Ireland with revolutionary ideas, liberty, equality, fraternity, which the Protestant ascendancy wasn't too happy about. And at the same time, within Ireland itself, there was a growing number of people who were gathering together under the heading of United Irishmen. Dissenters, the Presbyterians and the Catholics all had the penal laws restricting their rights. And they were beginning to get together, have meetings, and there was a great fear among the government and the ascendancy that things might be going to change. So to this end, appeasement was kind of seen as the best thing. And the appeasement came in the formation of relaxation of the laws. And one of the laws that was relaxed was the one on education. So in 1793, the laws allowing Catholics to be educated was changed, and they were permitted an education, but it was restricted. And Trinity College was seen as the place where Catholics should be educated, right under the thumbnail of the Protestants. It was at this stage that this man, Burke, Edmund Burke, whom you can see in the front of Trinity College, stepped in. And he was advising the bishops that this was the time, now was their opportunity to look for what he called a Catholic college for a Catholic people, and not to be governed by Trinity and its Protestant ascendancy values and ethos. And it was thanks to him that the law was passed in 1795, setting up the trustees and allowing them to buy a site and to develop a university. Now, the last thing they wanted was to be near Trinity College. And this is where we have the second aid, if you like, to the Catholic cause, and that was the Duke of Leinster, the second Duke of Leinster, William. And he was quite prepared to give them land and to give them this house in County Kildare in Maynooth. And this is what became acceptable and developed as the Royal College of St. Patrick. One of the things that Burke had said was that the problem with the Catholic setting up on their own, the major problem was the loyalty, that the Catholics were loyal to the Pope and not to the King. So the big thing was to show loyalty. And it was in this house that the Protestant ascendancy gave patronage, if you like, to the Catholics and allowed them to set up in Stoit House. Stoit House was named after John Stoit, who had it built. Now, at the time, it was only 2 stories, so that top bit there didn't exist. And this is what they were offered, this building, and they gratefully received it. It was out in Maynooth, a long way from the influence of the Trinity College and the Protestant ascendancy, and it was a Catholic college for a Catholic people. From the start, it had 70 students, and 7 professors. Now, a number of the students couldn't fit in Stoit House, so they were big housed in Parson Street, round the corner. So I think only 40 fitted here. And if you have a look at the size of it, this took bedrooms, this took eating areas, and it was fairly cramped. But they managed, and they got themselves established. Now, inside, you can see the beautiful entrance hall of Stoit House as it was built by Michael Stapleton. And it was built for John Stoit, as I say. He was a steward to the Duke of Leinster. And this niche here apparently is where they put a statue of the King, George III. And again, following the advice of Burke, this was to prove that they were going to be loyal to the King and not just to the Pope. And hopefully they would be left in peace to run their Catholic college on their own. In the grounds of the college, even older, is a tree known as the Silken Thomas tree. And this is a lovely link with the college, because the grounds of the Duke of Leinster, this was the deer park. And this was one of the yew trees being popular because they formed the wood for the bows and arrows. And this tree was left standing when the house was built. And it is said that Silken Thomas in the 1500s sat under the tree playing his harp just before he rose up in rebellion against Henry VIII. Certainly the tree is dated from that time. So it's a lovely link with the castle and the past history. The first thing that they bought for the college was this sundial. And it cost them the grand sum of £17 1 and 3pence. And it was a kind of a thing that was sort of fashionable at the time. It was on a granite plinth outside the new educational establishment and formed a nice point of interest for the new university. But very, very quickly, numbers rose, and within a year or two, there were 200 students looking for accommodation. And very quickly, these 2 wings were built on either side of Stoit House. And again, remember, the top wasn't there. That was added in the 1950s. So it was just 2 stories. And one of the interesting things is the arch on either side here. These arches reflect the fact that a number of the students here were sons of merchants and middle sort of farmers who had some wealth but hadn't had any powers up to now. And so when their boys came along to be educated, the horses brought them through the arches, and this is where they were delivered for their term in the seminary. The sundial, you can see there, still remains, but the niche, you can see, is empty. So George III was removed, the sundial remained. At the back, this long area here, this is Stoit House. It just shows you a lovely garden that brought them a little bit of, I suppose, sanctuary, a bit of peace. And this was the back of the original college. That was all there was, just a linear area, and very functional to supply classrooms, bedrooms for those coming to study here. But it wasn't just people coming to study for the priesthood. Further along from Stoit House, there was another house, and it was built by John Stoit's father, and it was built about a year earlier, and it had been rented out to Dean and Mrs. Craddock. He was the dean in Christchurch, and they owned this, and they called it Tara. And the dean had died, and Mrs. Craddock owned it, and the trustees in 1802 decided it would be a good idea to buy it to educate all the people trying to get an education who were not looking to be priests. So you had a number of young boys from the age of 12 onwards whose parents sent them here for a Catholic education. It had its own entrance, which was somewhere near the Protestant church today. But there were some studies jointly with the seminary. It existed until the opening of Clongowes College, when the boys transferred there. And this was taken over by the seminary, and today it's where the administrative offices are, including the office of the president. At this stage, the square had begun to develop. There's your long corridor and Stoit House, and a new house was built here for, again, rising numbers. And you had the lovely gardens beginning to be enclosed. The architecture here, Georgian, you have your lovely fan windows, your fan doors and windows over the door itself. You've got your lovely, long, elegant Georgian structures here. And a square was a typical feature of Georgian architecture as well. So this was a very, very restful, peaceful building, and lovely Georgian architecture. The southern side of the square was a bit unusual, and here it came about unwittingly as a result of the Bishop of Cork, John Butler, being made, or finding himself inheriting the title of the Earl of Dunboyne. And as Earl of Dunboyne, he felt it was his duty to marry and perhaps provide an heir to keep the earlship going in Dunboyne. He was Bishop of Cork, and unfortunately he had taken these clerical vows which weren't in keeping with his ideas of siring an heir. So he decided the only course of action is to leave the priesthood and marry and to provide an heir. And with great regret, this is what he did. But he was nearly 60 at this time, and providing an heir wasn't the easiest. And on his deathbed, having failed to provide an heir, he felt very badly that he had left the Catholic Church and wanted to be reunited with the Roman Church before his death. So he appealed to the Pope, he appealed to the Bishop of Dublin, Dr. Troy, to be received back into the Catholic Church. Now, not an easy thing to happen. Once you've left, you've left. On his deathbed, the priest who heard his last confession apparently whispered in his ear, "Once a priest, always a priest." So the man died happily. And happily for the Catholic Church, the law proceedings that followed his death provided for money to be bequeathed to the college in Maynooth from the estate. So as a result of this bishop becoming Earl of Dunboyne, Maynooth received a large amount of money, in which it set up Dunboyne House in his name for the benefit of postgraduate students, selected students from the college who would go and train in this building. And as he left a legacy to the college in the way of buildings, he also left this lovely legacy, which is a candelabrum which it hangs inside the entrance to the college, and it's still there today. It's in the new part of the college. A lot of people fail to look up, so a lot of people just don't notice it's there, but it was the from this time. As a result of Dunboyne House being built, there was a big gap, and it was filled. Now this map is a little bit out of sequence, but it was filled with a new building, Humanity House, which provided the third side of the square. One of the things that it provided for, apart from students, was provision for all the books. And if you look along the very top layer there, the top part of this Dunboyne House, this was the first library of the college. The books had been scattered all over the place. Ancient manuscripts, a lot of valuable books, documents, all really had no home, and this was the first time a home was provided. Now Dunboyne House, as you can see perhaps from the chimneys here, had a lot of fires. The students were postgraduates, and as a privilege they were allowed fires in their rooms to keep them warm while they were studying, and nobody really thought about the danger of fire to these books that were being housed in the top of Dunboyne House. One of the things that they did do, apparently, if you were to take a book without permission, you could be excommunicated. But I think, you know, if you let your fire out of control in Dunboyne House, nobody seemed to be bothered with the possibility of the place burning down. The square was very elegant, as I mentioned, very Georgian architecture on the outside, but the inside was total contrast, because this area was built to house students quickly. It was functional, it was linear, and you have all the rooms here for the students, dormitories downstairs, you had class halls and fire doors every now and again, but that was it. Very, very functional, and a total contrast with what I'll show you in a minute in the new Gothic building, and that was added on at a later stage. Now, talking about people here, one of the people that made a big influence on the place was Nicholas Callan. He was professor of natural philosophy from about 1826, and he invented the induction coil. Now, this is a form of producing electricity and revving it up like you do when you start the engine of a car. It starts slowly and then builds up. And he was trying to experiment to improve his induction coil. And he started with chickens, because at the gate of the college there was a little farm providing cows for the milk and chickens for food for the students. And he took the chickens and began experimenting on chickens. And then he obviously got a little bit more confident and began experimenting on the students, getting them to join hands, passing the electric current through their hands, and I suppose seeing how much they jumped and how much they got electrocuted halfway along the line. There's no talk of anybody having died, but he did go on to become famous for his induction coil. So there's Callan Hall is named after him, and I think there's also a Callan room in the new campus on the north side. Nicholas Callan is buried in the graveyard, and not only did he develop the induction coil, but he worked in the basement of Stoyd House, and the damp there was causing a lot of his equipment to rust, and out of annoyance he worked on something to solve this problem, and the galvanized iron was the result. So this was something else that he is famous for having developed. Now, no college or no heritage story is complete without its ghost story. And in the Georgian part of the college, Rhetoric House, one of the later buildings built, at the top is the ghost room. Now, the ghost room dates from 1841, when a student who was living in the rooms, it is reputed hadn't worked very hard, but anyway, he decided it was all too much and he took his own life. He cut his throat and he threw himself out of the window and was killed below. 19 years later, in the very same room, another student took his own life, but this time he didn't die immediately. He cut his throat, threw himself out, and survived for a few days, enough to tell his story. And the story goes that he was shaving at his mirror when he saw a figure behind with one of the razor blades, or the knife they used to use for shaving in those days. And this figure was encouraging him to cut his throat. And this is what he did. He cut his throat and threw himself out. So of course now stories abound of blood on the floor, of cloven hooves, of noises. And although a lot of these were not really verified, the stories continued until the room was finally, the wall was taken away and it was made into a little place of prayer, a little oratory. And it's still like that today. But every student who comes to Maynooth is told the story of the ghost room. Now, by 1838, the Ordnance Survey map shows the college as it was, and it was just the Georgian building, 3 sides of a square. This is Riversdown House that was used for the lay college. And here you have the gardens and the big long walk, because the rest of the college didn't exist at this stage. But what I want to have a look at is here, something very unusual, a brewery. Now, in those days, the water wasn't 100% safe to drink, and a lot of people preferred to have ale or beer, a kind of a diluted version of what we might drink today. And the trustees decided that there was so much beer being used, because all the students were offered beer with their meals or their evening meal, that it made sense to have a brewery. And a brewery was then built on the site in 1834. And it supplied drink quite happily for a number of years until 1840, when a certain temperance priest, a Father Theobald Matthew, came to Maynooth College and was preaching on the evils of drink. And as a result of his very persuasive talks, a lot of the staff and a lot of the students decided they were going to trade in their beer, their ale, for tea. And they were then given tea with their evening meal instead of beer. And as a result of this, the brewery closed down in 1864. But one of the lesser known facts is that a certain Mr. Theobald Matthew, in 1807, 30 years earlier, had been a student in Maynooth College. And the rules in the college were very strict, and so much so you weren't allowed to visit another student's room. Now, Mr. Theobald Matthew decided that this rule really was meant to be broken, and had a little party with a select gathering of his friends, in which there was a lot of drinking and a lot of card playing. And the revelry got so great and so noisy that apparently the authorities got to hear about it, and the man in question decided to jump before he was pushed, and he left the college, not having been ordained, but he left to keep his reputation intact. He later joined the Capuchins, and the rest is history. He joined the temperance movement and ironically came back and saw the end of the brewery in Maynooth College. And one other good thing about perhaps what he did was that the brewery having been finished, the site was then used for a gasworks, and a gasworks was built in the corner of the college grounds and provided for the first time lighting for the students, so they didn't have to spend a lot of their money on candles. So he did bring quite a lot of good into the college, finally. The 1845 was a watershed in the history of the college. And in 1845, the government decided to grant Maynooth a large amount of money as it was needed for repairs and for more space. And it was Peel that gave the college a grant of £30,000 and for a building, a new building. And this is the man who was brought in to create this new building. His name was Pugin, Augustus Welby Pugin. And Pugin was, like a lot of Victorians, he was an architect of the Gothic Revival style. And it was this building that was his creation. And this is the building you see in most of the pictures, including the picture we were looking at now with Stephen's garden picture. You have this lovely Gothic front facade of the new part, the Victorian part, if you like, of the college. And it finally enclosed the square, the Georgian square, and made it a square. Now, the chapel that you see there, and we're all familiar with, didn't exist. The money ran out. But Pugin was a bit of a character, and Pugin was renowned for his attention to detail, both inside and outside. But he was a big man, a man of great ideas, and he had grandiose plans for the college, which the money would not stretch to. He also had the idea that because his facade here was so beautiful, that he really, they should knock down Stoit House and Long Corridor, so that his beautiful building could be seen from the main street of Maynooth. Now, as we all know, this didn't happen. But apparently Pugin had a number of run-ins with the authorities, the trustees, and actually stormed off a few times, only to be placated and brought back. But his lovely building, you can see the detail, the turrets and the lovely oriel window, and this is the main President's Arch into which you enter the corridors. Now, in contrast to what we looked at earlier with the Georgian building, this is the Pugin building, the Gothic building. And here you can see attention to detail, the lovely scrolls above the door, the lovely Gothic arches. And this was the cloister area, and it was built to allow the clerical students somewhere to walk and discuss things in the dry, when it was raining. And it enclosed a little garden, St. Mary's garden there. It was built in typical Pugin style, and this is the Russell Library, which was part of the new Gothic building. And for the first time, the books could be then taken from the top of Dunboyne House and brought into the Russell Library for safekeeping. And you can see here a lot of them ancient manuscripts. There's a lot of archives here as well. And Pugin's attention to detail can be seen very clearly here over the doorway, and as I say, with the scrolls here. Now, it was there's more detail. It was nobody could foresee, having moved all the books, nobody could see that the Great Fire or foresee the Great Fire of 1878 that hit the college. Having established the books and this lovely library, on the morning of the 1878 in November, I can't remember the actual date, a fire broke out about 8:30 in the morning at the back of the college grounds. And immediately the fire engines were sent for from Carton. They came down and they made very little impact on the fire. So a telegram was sent to Dublin for the fire brigade to come and rescue the fire in the college. Unfortunately, same as modern technology today, unfortunately, the telegram didn't go through, and people were dispatched to Selbridge to send another telegram to get the fire engines out as quickly as they could. So the fire broke out at 8:30. It was about 11 o'clock before the fire engines came and started working on the flames, by which time they had taken hold of the roof, including the roof of the Russell Library, by which time most of the book's manuscripts had been taken to safety, and luckily it was only minor damage done to the roof, but it was a close thing. The library and its beautiful scrolls, its beautiful interior remained intact, and as did the books. The other building, main building in the Pugin corridors, was Pugin Hall, named after Pugin himself, and this was built for the students. It was their refectory, and what's striking is the light, the space, the height, and this was a student refectory. Again, a Pugin design, everything was grandiose. At the end of Pugin Hall, these three stained glass window features were put. They're not opening onto the outside, they're just opening onto another room behind. But again, it's just a contrast with the Georgian part of the building and this lovely neo-Gothic feature, I think is one of Pugin's finest in the college. The chapel wasn't built at this stage, mainly because, as I say, money ran out. During the post-famine period, the Office of Public Works was funding the college, and most of the money went into repairs. During the 1860s also, there was an outbreak of TB, and any money that was there was put into the development of an infirmary to deal with the students who were sick. So it was 1875 before a chapel could be built. Now, there were a couple of chapels in the college, but because the college was divided into junior and senior, there was no place that the whole of the seminarians could join together. And it was only from 1875 when a chapel was built. It took 6 years to build, built of limestone, and then it took 4 years to decorate. It was Charles Russell, one of the presidents, that was pushing for this, but it took a lot of fundraising. And the chapel finally built was not built by Pugin. Pugin at this stage was dead, and his son put in an application to become the architect of this new chapel, but he wasn't successful. And the chapel was built by J.J. McCarthy, and McCarthy had built other cathedrals around the country, including the one up in Armagh. So he was an experienced builder, but because the son of Pugin didn't get the rights, he was not allowed, he disallowed anybody who was building to use any of Pugin's plans. So J.J. McCarthy then very skillfully, very successfully used his own 14th century Gothic. The rest of the chapel here is 13th century, or the rest of the college is 13th. This is 14th century, slightly different, but it blends in very, very well with the building. But this is J.J. McCarthy's building. It had nothing to do with Pugin. Now, I'm aware that a talk has been given on the chapel, but just give you an idea of the inside and how large, how beautiful, and how well decorated it is. This is the high altar. At the back here is the Lady Chapel, and the Lady Chapel was used by Princess Grace on her visit over to Ireland in the 1960s. So first time we have a lady who actually features in the history in the background. There's more details of the roof and the chapel. The first organ was put in by Heinrich Beverungay, and Beverungay, this is not his organ, this is a later edition, but the work here, the stonework, dates from his time. Now, Beverungay developed the first organ, and he's buried in the graveyard here. The graveyard dated from more or less the start of the college, but it wasn't enclosed until much later on, the 1860s. And here the lovely yew trees emphasize the sort of, again, the Gothic little gate into the graveyard, a very peaceful little spot in the college. Now, another lady, one of the few who graced the grounds of the college, was the Empress Elizabeth of Austria. And while hunting on a stag hunt, while she was staying nearby, she strayed into the college. Now, she was a reputed beauty, Empress of Austria, Her nickname was Sissy, and Sissy was received very warmly by the president and vice president, who invited her in for afternoon tea. It's a bit like Downton Abbey. And as a result of her treatment here, or her she was received so well, she sent a statue, George and the Dragon, which she thought was the emblem of Ireland. Somebody must have filled her in the meantime, because she returned to Ireland. She enjoyed her visit so much, she returned to the college, and this time she sent a more appropriate gift to the college. This is now in the museum, the vestments with the shamrock on them, and in the college museum, but certainly she got it right this time around. Today, this is Maynooth College, and you can see the addition of a spire. This was added in 1902. It was part of the centenary of the college, and it sort of finishes off the chapel and the back of the college. And the grounds of the college have become a sanctuary today, and not just a Catholic college for Catholic people, but they've invited all the people in during COVID times to come and share the grounds, to come and walk in peace, to enjoy the tranquility, and to appreciate the heritage that's been left to us and still is providing for our needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat. That was absolutely excellent, and it just gave us such a wonderful insight. And I'm glad you finished on the note about it being a sanctuary for us for the present times, because that is something that's been so important for all of us being able to go around the grounds. And also, you will be pleased to know we no longer excommunicate people in the library. And most of our books are e-books now, so we have to think about what we could do if somebody lost an e-book. But thanks very much for that, Pat. And we'll now take questions. And we don't have questions in the chat box, so I'll just ask people, if you want to, you can either raise your hand using one of the icons, or if you're not familiar with that, just unmute and speak if you have any questions you want to put to Pat now. Eilish.
Pat, the original door from Stoyt House is supposedly the front door of the Geraldine Hall. Have you ever heard that story?
Yeah. Yes, that's true. That's true.
That's okay. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
And the link there. Yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah. Okay. That's all. That's just that one. Yeah.
Joyce is saying that kind of the talk was very interesting. Thanks, Joyce, for that. Anybody else, please?
Just going back, Eilish, to what you were saying, the plinth that the sundial was on was actually put there by the Duke as well. It was kind of one of the things that he was offering. You could put the sundial on it, and the little plinth below was actually donated by the Duke of Leinster.
Pat, when was the term Royal College of St. Patrick dropped and changed?
Well, it's actually very interesting, because in the commemoration, you know, when the foundation stone, there is a document. It's in Latin, and it has the letter R, and then it has Catholic, Catholica College, and the R isn't not written out fully. So it's supposed to be royal, but I think a lot of people reckon that it was the royal had been dropped at that stage. I think it was just there initially, really, on Burke's advice to be. There was a fear that the Catholics would be loyal to the Pope and that they wouldn't be loyal to the King. And I think Burke was persuading them to accept the idea that if the priests were loyal, then they would be preaching this from the pulpit to the Catholic masses, and hence it would be a good way of bringing them in and bringing them to become loyal to the King. So the royal, I think, was dropped very, very quickly. But yeah, it's interesting the way if you can come across that. It's in one of the books. I think it's in Latin.
Thanks for that, Pat. Anybody else? If there's no other questions, then we'll wrap up now. Elaine will be sending out the link to the recording and also a feedback form. So it only remains to me to thank you all for coming and to tell you that tonight we're at the College Chapel at 7:30, and tomorrow we have a talk on the library, the Russell Library, at lunchtime. And I want to thank Pat for such a fantastic talk. Thank you very much, Pat.
You enjoyed it?
Enlightening. And also I want to thank Elaine for in organising this event and the events of it. Thank you both very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
one
everyone.
question, but we will begin to close. People need to go. Somebody, James, is there a connection between Drumcondra, All Hallows and Maynooth?
I don't
No.
no, not particularly. I mean, apart from the, you know, the, I think probably people transferred from one to the other in more modern times, but no, not initially.
Thanks for that.
If anybody missed the tour of college, if you want to send me an email, you will have my email that I sent today. I can send you out the link because the booking is closed. So if anybody missed it, we can send you out the link if you'd like to join. The two talks go very well together.
I can. Thanks.
Okay.